Dear distinguished guests, good morning. Welcome to the inaugural Global Prosperity Summit, also known as GPS 24 in vibrant Hong Kong. My name is Carol Yu, and I'm honored to be your host today. Our world is undergoing a significant transformation from a unipolar order to multipolar, plurilateral, and multifaceted system. And globalization has brought closer connections among nations and regions, and magnifying the butterfly effect and shrinking the global village. So in this world, we know that no country or region can pursue isolation, and it's crucial for us to adopt long-term perspective and pursue collaboration together and remain open-minded for any new strategic partnership. We are very excited to have all of you, experts in your own fields, gathered together today to celebrate, to have in-depth discussions about the world, about all the challenges we face as humanity. And we need to work together to target all these challenges. As we begin, on behalf of the organizers, I just want to thank all the guests, all the speakers, and all the delegates for joining us from around the world. Your presence today underscores the importance of this gathering and shows our collective commitment to making our world a better place and a more sustainable future for all. So now, may I invite the Honorable Mrs. Regina Yip Lau Shuk Yi, convener of the non-official members of the Executive Council of Hong Kong, chairperson of Savantis Policy Institute, and convener of the Global Prosperity Summit, will officially launch our summit's first full day. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Professor Yang Jianmei, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning everybody, and welcome back to the Global Prosperity Summit. We have really nice weather, don't we? To our distinguished guests who travel... Well, to our distinguished guests who have traveled a long distance to join us, I hope you had a good rest last night. To our local participants who have risen early to be with us, I thank you for your staunch support. Actually, ever since Global Prosperity Summit was announced, we have been deeply touched by the overwhelming response we have received from the community and the media. Our full house of enthusiastic audience this morning testifies to Hong Kong's strong interest in playing a role in contributing to the future of global development. We have decided to hold a conference on global prosperity because prosperity is vital to our future, but global commitment to promoting greater prosperity for all is not salient. Multiple threats to the continued spread of prosperity loom on the horizon. Great power obsession with challenge to its global dominance has led to protectionist policies of tariff hikes, financial sanctions, and export controls to deny developing countries access to advanced technologies. The world is being fractured into opposing geopolitical blocs. The free trade and investment environment in the past few decades, which have helped lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, seems to belong to a bygone era. With national elections in 64 countries, plus elections in the European Union affecting 49% of the world's population taking place this year, politics seem to trump economics everywhere. In addition, there are troubling signs of rising polarization and political violence, not to mention dangerous wars being fought in Ukraine and the Middle East. Hong Kong being a small but open economy, we have a high degree of exposure to global risks and a keen interest in promoting common ground toward resolving these problems. For this reason, we decided to pinpoint 5 pressing issues impacting global prosperity for discussion, from great power competition to deglobalization, national security obsession, and the need for greater cooperation in science and technology and in fighting climate change. While there are great risks, there are also great opportunities because our world is blessed with great talents. Today, we are highly privileged to have brought together some of the greatest minds which have been pondering these issues and engaged in working out solutions. I'm extremely grateful that Professor Roger Kornberg, Nobel laureate in chemistry and authority on structural biology, has agreed to be our keynote speaker. I also wish to thank you distinguished scholars, Professor Steve Hankey of Johns Hopkins University and Ms. Susan Thornton, Senior Fellow and Visiting Lecturer at Paul Tai Chen China Center at Yale Law School, for taking the trouble to join us by Zoom from Baltimore and Brussels. Their willingness to stay up late and get up early to join our discussion is greatly appreciated. With so many talented speakers and seasoned moderators, I'm sure we will have a very productive day filled with inspiring discussions. It will be remiss of me to conclude my remarks without thanking the co-organizer, our co-organizer, the Shanghai Institute for International Studies, which has been giving us valuable advice. I wish to thank Professor Yang Jiemie for representing the Shanghai Institute and for speaking at one of the panels. I also wish to thank our advisors, members of the organizing committee, and our sponsors for their generous support. We owe the following organizations a great debt of gratitude for their sponsorship. They are the Innovation and Technology Commission of the Hong Kong SAR government, China Resources, China Merchants Group, the Sino Group, Sun OK Real Estate Agency, Cathay Pacific Airways Limited, the Hong Kong Jockey Club, CLP Power Hong Kong Limited, Matrix Ports, and China Petroleum Hong Kong Holdings Limited. We also wish to thank the Hong Kong Tourism Board for serving as our supporting organization. Also our thanks, of course, go to our MC, Ms. Carol Yu, Associate Dean of Shenzhen's InnoX Academy. Last but not least, I wish to thank our team of dedicated staff for the meticulous and tireless efforts in ensuring that this conference is a big success. Thank you, and now let the debates begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Regina. Through working with Regina, I'm so touched by her delegation to bring people together, for how much time and effort she puts into organizing this conference, and for her heart and love for Hong Kong. So let's give her a big hand. So now, let's dive into our first panel, globalization and deglobalization. As basic economic theory tells us, there's competitive advantage, and we go to wherever cost is lowest. But we also know that without proper protection, blue-collar workers lose jobs or get paid less. So as countries pursue supply chain diversification, we see that we don't know what's the impact on our economy and placing our global economy at risk. So how do we balance the interests of companies versus workers? And how do we evaluate potential risks and opportunities that globalization and deglobalization brings? So let me welcome our first, our moderator for the first panel, Handy Sender, former managing director at BlackRock and founder at Aspera Advisory, along with our esteemed panelists, Mr. Iñaki Amate, chairman of the European Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong, Professor Steve Hang, Professor of Applied Economics and founder and co-director of the Institute for Applied Economics, Global Health, and the Study of Business Enterprise at the Johns Hopkins University, who will be joining us virtually. And also Dr. Aaron Lee, Chairman and Managing Partner of Chengwei Capital, and Professor Li Pingxu, Director of the Center of Southeast Asian Studies and the Chief of the Department of Asia-Pacific Social and Cultural Studies at the National Institute of International Strategy of Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. So let's welcome them on stage for a thought-provoking discussion on globalization.
paid taxes in the city for more than 30 years, and I'm proud to be a permanent resident of Hong Kong as well. Even though I don't speak Cantonese after all these years. I want to particularly thank Regina and Tasha Tsui Lihai. All of us here are working to reverse this trend of anti-globalization. And no one is doing more to represent Hong Kong than Regina. So, on behalf of all of us. I will give you a brief roadmap and then we'll start the discussion. I'm going to start with Inaki to talk about the big macro picture. You know, what did we do wrong? Where did globalization go wrong? Was the reaction inevitable? And is it reversible? I am then going to turn to Eric. I first met Eric many, many years ago, and he was one of the most prescient investors I know who really saw how China was moving value added. And in a world where everything is dual-use technology, which has military and civilian elements to it, perhaps it was inevitable, however sad, that the U.S., which thought of itself as having a monopoly on technology, would raise alarms about China, however rightly or wrongly, and how Eric sees technology in China, where it surpassed the U.S., where it's closing the gap with the U.S., etc. And I'm going to ask him, as a precedent, before we hear from Dr. Kornberg about some of the areas where he's investing. For example, synthetic biology. I'm going to turn to Professor Xu. Before I turn to Professor Xu, I'm going to ask Professor Hankey to talk about the paradox that I see in the U.S., which no longer stands for free trade and has become rather populist and very protectionist in the name of resilience. And then I'm going to end with Professor Xu and how did China, and especially Hong Kong, navigate this world. But I'm going to ask the audience one question before I turn to you, Inaki, and that is, how many of you feel that anti-globalization is reversible? Raise your hand if you think it's reversible. How many of you think it's irreversible? That we will never return to the globalized world? Thank you. What's your answer to the question? In our chat, you described this world as dangerous and populist.
Yeah, I think it's one of the cycles in history. I think we are going through a cycle, and I believe that we will basically see this. I'm one of those that believe that we will see some sort of going back to globalization in one way or another at some point. I think the globalization that we live probably will not come back in the same way, because that globalization lives under the premise that there will be always somebody that has the power to define for others how they will be helping and supporting their development. And I think what we have seen is that as those that are basically utilized to support those with power, as they develop, they also have aspirations. And those aspirations cannot be forgotten, cannot be unseen. You need to develop a mechanism, a system for allowing those that have aspirations to continue that evolution. And sooner or later, they will need to basically there will need to be a matching game where you are able to understand that everybody needs to start performing under certain rules that allows everyone to really collaborate and be living in a sustainable environment. I think that we are moving into a world where everyone is trying to move production to the cheapest possible region in the world, And today, probably that's ending in Africa. But what happens when Africa is having those aspirations that we have seen passing from one region to another? I think probably the answer will be technological development. I mean, when we start seeing that machines are able to do a lot of the intensive labor force work that is actually now being handed over to lower and cheaper production centers, we will probably see a moment where humanity would need to start addressing how we are going to be able to coexist with that technological development.
I have not spent much time introducing everyone, but as you all know, INACI represents the European Chamber of Commerce. Now I want to ask you something. Should we talk about countries or should we talk about the interests of governments and companies? In this world, we need cooperation from both. Do you see them, companies and governments, as aligned or not? Because I often think that governments are the ones that are responding to, representing, advocating in many ways, populism. And companies are more, we want to sell to the whole world, we want to produce for the whole world, but yet, as you say, it's all about lowest cost. How do we have a more healthy dialogue, and how do you navigate in your own role as advocate with governments and the companies that you represent?
I think it's a very synergetic relationship in the sense that the image that companies tend to just focus on selling and profitability of shareholders, that has changed quite a lot in the last decade. I think that today organizations and companies, private sector, are a lot more scrutinized by the stakeholders that look at what are the different impact that the impact that the organizations are bringing into the social, into the community, into the environment, and that scrutiny is actually making organizations to be a lot more running at the forefront in some cases for helping the governments to define regulation. And here in Hong Kong, we actually, the European Chamber and the European organizations, we've been trying to bring in best practices from the organizations we represent in Europe, where we are actually many times leading in terms of technology around the environment, many times leading around the way that we self-regulate and the way that the European Union has been regulated. We are trying to bring that best practice to this part of the world. And that means that we need to have a dialogue, a conversation with the government about what we think is in the best interest of the community.
How do you create that incentive structure? Can you give maybe an example of a challenge and what you're doing in this very polarized world to create the right incentive structures to align governments and companies to think longer term, when both of them have an incentive, whether it's electoral cycles or short-term profitability, to maximize short-term in a world that needs to think longer term?
So I think when we talk about environmental sustainability, is probably one of those areas where it is easier to actually discuss long-term cycles beyond the elective cycles that happen in most of the countries in the world. But one of the things that we're starting to see is that also at the corporate level, there is a need for shifting the focus from the short term, which is typically the objectives of the CEOs and the leadership team, that they tend to focus on the quarterly results, the annual results. And that shift needs to happen at the board level. So the board of the organization is the one that probably needs to start looking into what is the long-term vision in a world where there are several threats that can impact the long-term viability of the company. So those are today obviously climate change, but more and more it is going to be the influence of new technologies like artificial intelligence, and how it is regulated is something that is in our interest and is also interest of the public sector, that we actually have well-defined railways that are helping us to understand where is the limitation of that we want to impose into private organizations and for the consumers.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to turn to Eric. In our conversation, you talked about the need for carrots and sticks, and you talked about some of the things that the Spanish government is doing. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes.
Because it's absolutely critical that the private and the public sector work together going forward.
Yes, we talk a little bit about the fact that today it's very important to understand that if you want to have a good alignment between the two sectors moving forward, you need to put incentives to facilitate that organizations are able to take advantage of the opportunities that are set for them, and also thinking a little bit about what is happening at the moment in Spain, where you have organizations that are trying to relocate into different parts of the country, where you have the organizations that are trying to think whether it makes sense or not to invest in certain industries or not. You need to start thinking about what are the mechanisms that you put in place in order to facilitate that. And most of the time you think about things like sticks like tariffs and sticks like trade barriers. But what we are seeing at the moment is that those do not necessarily always work. And you need to think a little bit about other mechanisms that incentivize, like for example, allowing for giving incentives in the form of bringing giving the sponsorship for allowing different types of segments of the population to start working. We are seeing a bit of a problem with our young youth unemployment, which is about 25% in the case of Spain, and then you have also a little bit problem with unemployment with the eldest part of the population. So introducing incentives to bring these people into companies as a carrot is actually something that we're starting to see that is starting to happen. Maybe that's something that could be also introduced in some cases here in Hong Kong. We're starting to see the need for attracting talent, and I think it would be quite interesting to think how we can incentivize bringing more diversity into Hong Kong by measures like this one.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. We're going to go from the very macro now to the more micro, and I am going to ask Eric to talk about how he's navigating this world where dual-use technology means that the U.S. is feeling quite threatened by China, and how he sees the gap between U.S. and China on a whole range of technologies, and how he is deploying his capital in this world now compared to before. And it's my belief that the private markets in China have huge opportunities. So at the end, I'm going to ask him to be very specific and talk about China in this world where I think private markets in China are hugely interesting. But Eric, over to you.
I'm not going to give you my trade secrets.
I'll try on behalf of the audience, both investing and exiting.
Okay, well, so this dual-use business is really not very useful concept. You know, it's totally arbitrary. Everything can be dual-use. Toilet papers can be dual-use. So
we don't want to think about that.
It's not a useful concept. So let's come back to talk about technology and what China's doing in technology. China's current push to raise the technology content in its economy, I think is mostly, if not completely, driven by China's own needs for the next stage of its development. It's being perceived as a rivalry with the U.S., but it's driven...
Especially by the U.S., yes.
Which is understandable. Okay. But look, I mean, we got a huge economy, the largest in the world. But if we need to raise the per capita income of Chinese people by a notch or two, maybe 3 notches in the next generation or two. Okay. I mean, our per capita income is still low relative to many other countries, although our economy is huge. We simply cannot do that without substantially increasing the technological value add in our economy. It's just not possible. Okay, let me give you an example. Okay, so our industrial capacity is the largest in the world. We're the biggest industrial country in the world. About 35% of the world's industrial output. Our industrial capacity is bigger than the US, Germany, Japan put together. Okay, my research assistant just told me last quarter the numbers have moved. So our industrial capacity is bigger than US, Germany, Japan, and India put together. Okay, so it's huge. It cannot get any bigger. But the value add of the industrial capacity is still relatively low, about 12%, I think. It's like the gross margin of our industrial capacity. Okay? If you look at the U.S. in the 1960s and 70s, when America was at the height of industrial power, their gross margin, their value add was 30, 40%. Okay? And the industrial capacity was about 5 to 10 trillion US dollars. It's huge, bigger than all countries. Okay? So it's that 30 percentage point gap in value add on a denominator of 5 to 10 trillion US dollars. That's the money we must go make if we are to raise our per capita income by a couple of notches in the next generation. We simply cannot do that without making that money. Okay? And that's on existing industrial capacity. But also there are new industries that are being led by technology innovation on day one, like alternative energy. Okay? So these China is doing well. Okay? It's leading the trends.
Can I just interrupt you there, because that's such an interesting point. You know, if you look at where China has clear leadership, it's in robotics and the optimal combination of labor and capital. So I think that demographics is actually less of a concern than many other people do, and I wondered if you could address that.
It's possible. It's possible. Okay. So yeah, but demographic is an issue. We have a gap where we're going to have too many people retiring and not enough people working in 20 years from now. But 20 years from now, who knows what it looks like? Okay. So
are you investing in robotics
we have
and
robotics,
smart manufacturing?
Yeah, exactly. So what we're investing in are technologies, what I call technology-enabled industrial capacity. Okay. So to raise the level, you know, I like to use the iPhone story. Okay. So when Apple began to make iPhones, all the iPhones are made in China, 100%. Okay. I had this conversation with a U.S. official one time. This is a digression. Okay. A couple of years ago when we had the flare up over Taiwan. Okay. And he said, you know, if you guys make a move on Taiwan, we'll have enormous sanctions, huge sanctions. My answer is, who will be sanctioning whom? You know, if you sanction China, I go back to use iPhone 10. I was happy with it 5 years ago. But if we sanction you, you won't have iPhones at all. Just a joke. Okay. So when U.S. began to use iPhones, make iPhones in China 10 years ago, it's a $1,000 product. We kept 3.5% in China. Okay. Today, the number is up to 26%. Enormous progress. Okay. I mean, if we made the chip in there, it would be 60% or 70%. We don't, unfortunately. Maybe we will one day. Okay. So we need to repeat the iPhone story in every sector. That's what China needs to do. To raise, again, the goal is to raise our per capita income by a couple of notches in the next generation. That's all we're after. Now, the U.S. perceives that as a threat. Understandably, I mean, I think the United States had made a tremendous amount of money in the last 20, 30 years through globalization, especially in this relationship with China. Okay? But it didn't distribute that money equitably inside America. It didn't invest well inside America. That's why it's finding it difficult to compete and win based on current rules. So that's what this deglobalization trend is happening as reality. We have to deal with that. But China is doing all this technology stuff, you know, for its own needs.
You made a very important point earlier, saying that China is developing technology for its own needs. One of the interesting things that you said in our conversation as we were preparing for this panel, I asked you whether government was chilling private innovation, and you said absolutely not. And we talked about the fact that actually the US and the Department of Defense were the catalyst for developing technology in the US itself. Could you talk about the fact that people have maybe this artificial distinction between the government and private sector innovation, and how you see the government and innovation, working hand in hand?
Yeah, so this dichotomy between state and market, and somehow they are opposed to each other in technology, that's fraud. It's just fraud. It didn't happen this way. Okay, so it so happened in the last 20-some years, our big techs are mostly in consumer-oriented platforms, right? Social media, e-commerce. Now those kind of business models, the government had very little to do with. Okay, but that's an anomaly. If you look at hard tech, real technology development, the state had always played a leading role because it needs investments, it needs far-sightedness. I mean, I'm a private investor, I'm a venture capitalist. I know we're short-sighted, okay, but let's not fool ourselves. Okay, we're into short-term profits. Okay, we're not gonna make the kind of investment that's gonna generate. TSMC. When I was graduating from Stanford Business School, many years ago, many years ago. Okay, at that time, Morris Chan came and gave a talk, and we were all steeped in neoliberal doctrines at that time. We were all laughing at it. We were all saying TSMC was a stupid investment. It was government-led, state-sponsored, low return on capital, asset-heavy. The smart people are in Silicon Valley doing fabulous design. And look at TSMC now. Yes, but no private investor would have done that. Okay. And Silicon Valley, of course, if you go to Silicon Valley in the 1970s, the state played a huge positive role in the development of Silicon Valley and the internet. Ask Elon Musk, who his biggest patron is.
I'm going to interrupt you for 1 minute.
Yeah.
Tell you a story, and then I'm turning to another investor to pick up on your point that private sector venture capital is too short term. I was talking to the woman who runs the investment arm of Economic Development Board in Singapore. Singapore was one of the earliest investors in Moderna, way before COVID, because the Singapore government wants to diversify its economy and identify biotech as an area where Singapore should develop away from real estate and financial services. Kim, do you think that Hong Kong should use its $500 billion in reserves to do more long-term backing of innovation? Kim Chan is one of Hong Kong's locals. I'm one of the voice of Hong Kong and an investor who has done so much to help this city globalize.
I want to highlight the risk of being seated next to the moderator and speaking frankly with your opinion about the topic, and also expressing admiration for some of the panelists like Eric. Thank you for coming back again to Hong Kong. What you said at FCC, fantastic. You come here so often, why don't we just move here? And Professor Hanky, I told Henry how much I have been following you since the Indonesian crisis, and as an Indonesia investor, I am so honored that I'm virtually in the same room with you today. Enough of the risks. I'm unprepared for this question, so I'm going to be speaking probably without much regard of personal risks. I was or may still be as steeped in liberal capitalist progressive ideas as Eric was 2 years ago at Stanford. I do not, even though I'm a part-time Singaporean, meaning I do Southeast Asia, I go to Singapore all the time, I do not really believe that you hire a bunch of people who score very highly in public examinations and they will become good investors. And they may not even be very good custodians of hard-earned capital accumulated by the collective population. But having said that, GIC has done very well, obviously, compares very well with the peers. Stop me, I may be speaking too long. I am not sure we can replicate that. I know Regina disagrees with me because I've had this discussion with her before. I'm not optimistic that Hong Kong can replicate that. I think we should rely on private sector. And I think we should attract talent from all over the world who are specialists as opposed to a government-led.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So, Eric, one final question to you, and then we're turning to Professor Henke. And that is, can you talk to us about the areas, very briefly, where you're deploying your capital?
So, back to my earlier remarks. I think basically the Chinese economy is in transition, moving away from the old drivers of our growth in the last 20, 30 years, real estate, consumer internet platforms, and lower-end manufacturing, towards more technology-led growth. And what are these new technology-led growth? One is industrial technology-enabled industrial capacity, and that's, like you said, manufacturing technology, robotics, AI manufacturing, image capturing, all these things that happen in the industrial process. Okay, supply chain technology, for instance, that's we're active in that. China has world's largest supply chains, textile, for instance. 93-94% of the world's textile is made in China. Huge supply chain in China, highly inefficient, needs to be updated, digitized. Okay, semiconductor, without you don't have to say why. It's huge.
2 more minutes.
Okay, and life sciences and synthetic biology. 2 more seconds.
Thank you. That's great. I now turn to Professor Henke as his awesome, odd interlocutor. When we were preparing for this panel, we talked about what has happened to the U.S. and how it has come to stand for very different things today than in the past. Once the U.S. was the forerunner of free trade, and now it's all about protectionism, populism, misallocation of capital. Professor Henke, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Well, thank you, Henny. Great to be with you and Regina and all the rest of you, even if it's virtual. I think kind of leading into that, I'm listening and thinking about Hong Kong, and I was thinking about it earlier this evening, and I noted that we're talking about global prosperity, and exhibit 1 for me would be Hong Kong, and I'm holding in my hand here a book, Architect of Prosperity, Sir John Cowperthwaite, and the Making of Hong Kong. It's a wonderful book, and it reminded me, in thinking about this, of the years that I was with Reagan and Reaganomics. And there are 5 pillars of prosperity, not only in the book Making Prosperity about Hong Kong, but Reaganomics. And those are 1, light taxes; 2, small government; 3, stable money. Of course, you have that with the Currency Board and the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. 4, smart life regulation. And 5, the thing we're focused on now, free trade. That's it. So thinking about what's going on now, we have right now, when we're talking about deglobalization, last year we had the slowest rate of increase in global trade in goods and services that we've had in the last 50 years. So we are talking about a huge reduction in global trade that's upon us. And I think it all comes down to ideas, because the 5 pillars of prosperity that I just listed are kind of out, and people have gotten this idea that the state is in, and the state is going to be allocating capital. Industrial policy is now the new mantra in the United States, and we've never had this industrial policy, or what I call state capitalism, in the United States before. We've never had that model. And it came in 2001, really officially, and it means that the state is going to be allocating much more capital and be restricting trade and so forth and so on. And just think about sanctions. Since 2021, sanctions have been imposed, a 900% increase in sanctions that are being imposed by the United States. Now, that's just a form of protectionism. That's the same as a quota. It's the same as a non-tariff barrier. It's the same as a tariff. They're all forms of protectionism, and the public is pretty much bought into this. I mean, they go along with the sanctions. Why do you think the politicians are doing it? They get by with it, and they're popular. And things now, we're faced with what, 100% tariffs proposed on EVs and solar panels coming from China. So I think it's a change in ideas. The whole concept has changed dramatically since the years of, in particular, Thatcher and Reagan, but also just the whole basis of Hong Kong. I mean, you've been living in Hong Kong. You've had the 5 pillars. Why do you think Hong Kong's so prosperous? And when you think about industrial policy, the big problem in this is you're giving the decision-making nexus into the bureaucracy. And once you do that, people are making decisions about allocating capital, and they're doing so without having to face the penalties and costs associated with making bad decisions. In the private sector, in the profit and loss system, you know very well what happens. You go broke if you make too many bad decisions.
Professor Henke, I wonder if we could talk on a more granular level for a minute as we did in our conversation. And you talk about the state allocating capital. Should we talk about the state misallocating capital? And let's use the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. Do you see these things as giving the wrong incentives? And we were talking about, for example, TSMC locating its semiconductors in Arizona, the most arid state in the US. Could you talk a bit about specific things that we've seen in, the administration in Washington enacting, and how you see the consequences, whether it's the Chip and Science Act or the Inflation Reduction Act?
Okay, first let's go to the reason for this huge increase, I think, and it's the arithmetic behind the huge increase in government intervention and industrial policy and the subsidies and these various acts that you mentioned, Annie, is the green climate mandates. And once you have a mandate, we are estimating on an international basis, McKinsey has done this, that by 2030, there'll have to be roughly $55 trillion of capital allocated into green and green technologies. And the production of green will be only profitable for about 25% of that. So 75%, 3/4 of it, will have to be produced by enterprises that can't make a profit by engaging in those activities, those green activities. So that means, again, the arithmetic is that the state will have to subsidize a lot of this. And then we're getting into the granular issue of Arizona. So we've got these chip factories going in there. And you've got TSMC with about $6 billion in subsidies going into them. For 3 fab units, you've got $8.5 billion going into Intel for 2 fabs and the renovation of another. And where are they located? They're located in Arizona. That happens to be an arid state that's dependent on the Colorado River and the Green River for water sources. And there's a so-called shortage. Now, why is there a shortage? Because the state allocates the water. There isn't a water market. There aren't private property rights in the water as you normally think of it in the Colorado River Basin. It's allocated by the state, and most of the water is actually allocated for agriculture, very little for non-agricultural purposes. And as a result, right now, we have a water shortage. There are suburbs in Phoenix that they stop development of home building because they don't have any water. But yet you're putting these high water use industries and locating them there, and the question is, well, where are they going to get the water? This is a big political problem because it's decided politically and bureaucratically. If it was a market, of course, there wouldn't be a shortage. The price would clear the market, whatever the demand and supply of water happen to be. If you had a market and private property and the water rights, the market would clear whatever the equilibrium price had to be. Part of the problem, by the way, with the allocation of water in the Colorado River Basin, it's priced too low. It's allocated bureaucratically and politically, and it's priced too low, and as a result, you've got a shortage.
I'm going to ask you a kind of tricky question. Earlier on, and you were kind enough to join us when it's so late your time, we heard Inaki's remarks about how both governments and private sector can be too short-term. So therefore you have problems allocating capital for problems that are really long-term. And yet what we see in the States is massive capital misallocation, distorted incentives, all from mispricing. How do we go forward? What is your recommendation in a world where...
Well, I think, Henny, it gets back to the original thing that I was talking about. It's ideas. We have to somehow change people's ideas and get them back to the 5 pillars of prosperity and thinking about free markets and thinking about, by the way, the performance of state capitalism. That hasn't worked out very well wherever it's been tried, by the way. Yes, you do have some examples of things that were worked out, but in general, we find the following. You've got the iron law of state capitalism, and that is over budget, over time, under benefits, over and over again. That's the iron law of state capitalism.
Thank you very much. Inaki, do you have a question for Professor Hankey?
I guess if we think about reversing the current situation, it's a multi-complex problem. You have so many dimensions that you need to take into consideration. I I do think that we have a problem where the current model is under question by certain countries, and I think you have a young part of the population that today is questioning the way things have been done in the past. So when you talk about these 5 pillars, do you think that they will resonate with the TikTok generation?
Excellent question.
I think the answer to that is yes, but there is a big problem with in general the media. Hankey's rule is a 95% rule when it comes to the media. 95% of whatever you're reading in the media is either wrong or irrelevant, and it gets into what's called Gresham's law of talk. Bad talk drives out good talk. That's our problem. We have to figure out how to overcome Gresham's law of talk and get the message across. Why? It's a fairly. I said exhibit number 1 is Hong Kong. Why has Hong Kong been so prosperous? They pretty much stuck with the 5 pillars. And why have any, if you drill down any of the Asian tigers, why really were they successful? I think that they were successful because there was a heavy reliance on the 5 pillars, and the ones that didn't rely on it didn't do very well.
I'm going to interrupt you there because we're running out of time. We have less than 10 minutes. I want to thank you so much for staying up with us, Professor Hankey. And now I'll turn to Professor Xu. You know, we're in a world today where emerging markets are more than 50% of the global economy. And China is, to some extent, the spokesperson for what we call the global south or emerging markets. In this world, how did China and Hong Kong navigate? And what is your impression of Hong Kong's relations with its neighbors and how we can become closer to them? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Mr. Li Zheng, and Your Excellency Professor Yang Zhichi, very good morning, distinguished guests and dear friends. It's my great honor for me to attend this summit and together with you in this beautiful and prosperous season in Hong Kong. Actually, I have a presentation, so you can look the presentation about my topic about. Before I answer your question, maybe I will talk about my presentation. Okay. I will. Maybe I talk about the 4 points. And the first point about China view about globalization and deglobalization. The second about the role and position of ASEAN in the trend of globalization. The third about the Belt and Road Initiative able to show its distinct advantage. The last one, the role of Hong Kong in the new globalization, especially in the context of the Belt and Road Initiative. So, okay, no problem. So, I think, according to the China, I think how to understand the globalization. So maybe we have 3. We think globalization is about the 3 modernization, namely economic globalization, political polarization, and culture diversification. This is, I think, this is the foundation from China about democracy, globalization, and how to think about how to understand the deglobalization. Maybe about 3 aspects. The first is flow works around the world has caused more unbalanced distribution, especially the gap between the rich and poor among various countries. The second, global governance has encountered profound institutional skills. The most important things in the institutional arrangement for the distribution of the global wealth has become more unfair. The third, the globalization promotes the transformation in a movement of culture, information, and people, brings a representative challenge to nation countries. This is about the meaning of the globalization. So, how we can see the role the ASEAN in the trend of globalization. I think ASEAN as an active player in globalization, I think more and more is very important, because I think ASEAN now become the new impetus of the economic increase in globally. So the ASEAN as a partner of global thoughts, I think more and more play active play. You can see by participating in the national organization, promoting initiative and advocating multilateral ASEAN countries are driven to issue the international rules are more aligned with the needs of global diversity and international order, compared with the interests and the concern of all the countries. So this is the role of the position of the ASEAN. And the third one about the new globalization, I think the Belt and Road Initiative can show its distinct advantage, because the BRI proposal and promoted by China has a major and significant public good, with the potential enhance globalization and reform of the global governance system. And then the BRI initiative allows to foster greater participation, gain, and happiness among the majority of 1,000 countries globally. And the last one about the role of Hong Kong in working with the ASEAN joint build and role. I think Hong Kong have a key role in working with the ASEAN in the Belt and Road Initiative. I think Hong Kong have 4 advantages. One is the geography advantage, especially Hong Kong's strategic location. First is a unique position as a gateway between China and ASEAN. This is example by the role in facilitating hardware facility connectivity between the two regions. For example, maritime connectivity is a notable example. The second is Hong Kong's talent pool. Talent pool is a scientific asset comprising individuals with deep understanding of the international norms and practice. This talent pool serves as valuable resources for China and ASEAN in their efforts to promote the Belt and Road Initiative. One advantage of Hong Kong is that it serves as a center of cultural exchange between the East and the West. This advantage can be leveraged to promote understanding between China and ASEAN in terms of religion, culture, and other aspects, and enhance people-to-people connectivity between China and ASEAN. I answer your questions. And another advantage is that Hong Kong is an international financial center. This position can be exploited to promote financial integration, green financial development, and sustainable development in ASEAN infrastructure development. Furthermore, I think the development of a headquarters economy necessitates the implementation of the measures to facilitate Chinese enterprises in establishing ASEAN investment
I'm going to cut you off.
in Hong Kong. Okay.
I'm going to ask Eric one question, and that is, Eric, are you piggybacking on your Chinese companies as they go into ASEAN? Briefly, and
yes.
we're at a time end.
Yes, we have these new alternative energy companies, manufacturing technology companies, biotech. All of these companies are globalizing. So I want to come back to your original question. Do you want to? Can we reverse deglobalization?
Yeah.
I don't think we should, because we can't go back. We got to go forward. So what we're going through is deglobalization. When we get through that, and then how do we re-globalize? And the re-globalized world will be very different from the last globalized world.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. I want to thank you all. Sorry that we didn't have more discussion across each other, but it's been a privilege for me to be here today, and I'm more proud than ever. When people ask me where I'm from, I say Hong Kong. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Well, all the panelists, please remain on stage, and please, Mrs. Regina Yip and Professor Yang Jianmian, please go on stage, take a good photo together. interesting thoughts, but I'm sure we'll carry on the debate as we go through the day. I'm a sound supporter of globalization, but I think hearing the opposing view always brings us new insights. So recently, I'm actually reading, Trump's trade representative Robert Lighthizer Lighthizer book on No Trade Free, and I think it's very important to really have all stakeholders' interests in mind as we go through this re-globalization efforts. So now let's hear from our second panel on pan-securitization, and let's welcome our moderator, Mrs. Regina Gibb, on stage. And also with our esteemed panelists, Professor Wang Wei, Executive Vice President of the Chinese Institute of Hong Kong, Director of the Center for Taiwan, Hong Kong and Macau Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Ambassador Kurt Hong, Managing Partner at Asia Group. I think, the private sector always looks for certainty, stability, and free market to grow. But the increasing emphasis on national security and national policy has taken a toll on business and investment decisions. As discussion of de-risking versus decoupling threaten to impact global prosperity. So this panel will examine, the balance, the delicate balance between national security and also economic prosperity for all. So let's hear from them.
Thank you, Carol, again for your kind introduction. This topic that I chose is pan-securitization and the impact on development. And by pan-securitization, I wasn't thinking about turning assets into securities. I was really thinking about the national security first policy, which seems to be adopted by many countries. And national security is my favorite subject, as you all know. And Hong Kong, we just managed to enact our Article 23 legislation, really as part of our defensive mechanism. Since its commencement on 23rd March, I think everybody will have noticed there has been no wave of arrests. It's really to complete our legislation to bolster national security. And in fact, we are all very relaxed that we have completed our constitutional and legal duty toward our country. But unfortunately, we were hit by news yesterday that 3 Hong Kong residents in London were arrested for spying or getting access to protected information or assisting a foreign agency. This is very troubling, but this is part of a trend of every country privileging national security. So I want to put my first question to Kurt. In the old days, U.S. was perceived as a great friend and supporter of China. During World War II, you helped us to fight the Japanese, and you helped China accession to the WTO. U.S. has always supported Hong Kong's free trade regime, a big trade and investment partner. But there seems to have been a sea change in the policy. I came across a report by 2 former ambassadors to India, to report. Don't know whether you have seen it. It's a report to the Council on Foreign Relations. It's quite interesting. Revising U.S. grand strategy toward China from a policy of engagement, integration into the world economy, into a policy of containment, and stepping up of export control, sanctions, etc., which is perceived by China as, toughening the containment of China, keeping China down. Why has this happened? China is only a middle-income country. Its per capita GDP is about 13K US, middle income. US is what? 84,000 per capita, We have many problems, demographics, slowing economy, all that. why does the U.S. have to adopt such a radical change of policy to identify China as the #1 national security threat?
Well, thank you, Regina. And first, I just want to say thanks for having me today at this event. And I think all of the effort and time has been put into organizing this summit is very laudatory. I'm just really excited to be part of what will hopefully be a series of really meaningful engagements between thought leaders from a variety of countries in Hong Kong to talk about the problems that you're raising. You know, I'm going to put on my I work for a company called the Asia Group. We provide advice to private corporations, but I'm going to put on my Georgetown University professor hat because we actually have 2 units devoted to this very question that you just raised, and it is a complicated question because there are theoretical writings. Graham Allison's book about the Thucydides trap is, of course, the most popular one. That share this notion that a status quo power, in this case the United States, and a rising power, in this case China, are inevitably destined for conflict, and perhaps even outright conflict in the form of war. But then Allison, in his own book, challenges that notion and points out to many examples where that has been avoided, and not only avoided, but that the relationship has changed in a way that becomes very cooperative. So one of the things that I think about on this topic, I'm sorry to go on too long, but I just want to frame it for you, is that the post-World War II rise of Japan and Germany in particular, economically, was perceived in the United States as a threat. And I grew up and was trained in the days when the primary challenge to the U.S. economically and technologically was considered to be Japan and secondarily Germany. And the reaction to that was protectionist in nature. Like we're seeing now in the United States, that there will be tariffs announced tomorrow, which are part protectionism and part kind of technology strategy in terms of their design. And the drift towards protectionism in the United States was profound at that time, but as it is now, but it's subsided over time. And I think that the difference is that for geopolitical reasons, the United States and China have found themselves on opposite sides of many issues. The most prominent one recently is Russia's invasion of Ukraine and China's continuing support of Russia despite that invasion. But there are other examples of geopolitical differences of opinion or standoffs between the U.S. and China. And so that I actually have 2 answers to the question. One is that with that geopolitical framing, China's economic rise becomes viewed more as a threat than an opportunity over time in the United States. Now, the U.S. is trying not to say the word containment. They're saying the word competition. From China's perspective, it feels like containment. And there's a little bit of kind of sophistry around the terminology there. But that is a fundamental fact that the geopolitics is driving some of the reaction. And the other reason that I find is profound is that the nature of China's economic structure, with a heavy degree of reliance on state-owned enterprises and state-directed capital, and still to this day suppressed domestic demand and household demand, which is well documented and discussed by the IMF and everybody else, that is also leading to a feeling of overconcentration of manufacturing capability in China compared to the rest of the world, and that's also viewed as a threat from the United States. So it's a combination of that geopolitical pressure or threat or perceived threat, and then the nature of China's capitalism with Chinese characteristics or socialist approach to economic development that is leading to the friction that we're seeing now. So my hope is that this will be well understood by everyone and solutions can be found to diffuse the various problems, and also that perhaps most importantly for China's long-term development as well as its smooth economic relations with other countries, that the pace of economic reform within China resumes and China continues to move in the direction of a more market-oriented economy. So sorry to give you a long discourse, but it was a very complex question.
Thank you, Kurt. Before I turn to Professor Huang, maybe I could just respond very quickly to your comments, shared by many columnists, that China should encourage its people to spend more, to use consumption to boost growth. I think it's not just state policy, it's partly cultural. Chinese people like to save. Historically, we always have a high level of savings. They like to buy homes, and you may have heard mainland Chinese tourists in Hong Kong are spending far more abstemiously than before. Generally speaking, the Chinese culture on the mainland is more austere, more stoic than Western societies. So there's also a cultural factor other than state policy. But now I'd like to turn to Professor Huang. Well, what do you think of the Western view of China as a national security threat? What should we do to mitigate such anxiety?
Thank you, Lady Lau. Also thanks, Ambassador. It's also my great pleasure to be invited for this panel in particular. As our previous session has discussed, about the globalization, deglobalization, or even anti-globalization, at least for market, for economy, for prosperity, development, etc. Either we use the term globalization or connectivity, sharing the opportunities, etc. Are the keys, rather than deglobalization, disconnection, or decoupling, or even the soft term de-risk. U.S. was the key one to drive the previous or last globalization. Either we agree or not, there can be globalization again, or re-globalization, as Eric argues. But in terms of economic opportunities or sharing opportunities for prosperity for all, I think we should not emphasize so much on geopolitics, nor to politicize, even weaponize those arrangements for such as trade, technology, etc. Of course, national security, either from the U.S. point of view or Chinese point of view, for whoever, are so crucial for even for development. Such two sides of the one coin. Without national security, or you don't have the foundation. But on the other side, without development, prosperity, and connectivity, the so-called security would be very weak. So back to Ambassador's the 2 points, I think for the first we should also recognize, as the previous session many speakers have emphasized, we have much more than just geopolitics nowadays. Democratic change, climate change, change or even challenges in terms of the global governance. All of those are the common issue and challenges to all of us. Whatever political, social differences we may still have. Second, I think even in terms of geopolitics, we do not have to have that kind of 18th century or 19th century sort of narrative saying zero-sum game, yeah, or either or sort of binary approach, but rather see how even both geopolitical and geo-economies, as when the U.S. Previous President Bill Clinton has emphasized, that's economy. If no more the only issue, but still the key issue for all of us. So even when you have mentioned the Ukraine war, actually I would argue if China had supported Russia, the result would have been very different nowadays. Second, in terms of the competition, of course, market economy, global economy, whatever we describe it, there has to be competition. But the competition does not necessarily mean a kind of consequence of zero-sum. Okay. So for the Chinese, we have used the term competition, cooperation and competition. Even I can remember, Jian can correct me, even 30 years ago, in the early 1990s, we used the term when China was just beginning to get into that globalization, competition, the cooperation and the competition. That was kind of a constructive and healthier environment for all of us. So I would think for some U.S. either people in the national strategy, national security circles, when they see China, they have more sort of perceptions than realities. Have a narrative first, then see China can be next even much bigger, stronger challenger. As you mentioned, Japan, Germany, their economies was getting stronger. This was not necessarily the case, and as Lady Lau has just emphasized, also quite crucial, I think, is the cultural differences. And for China, still one of the few nowadays which now is seeing globalization is such a good opportunities, not only for Chinese but for all of us.
Thank you, Professor Wong. I think your points are that the China threat is really overplayed. The perception of the China threat is overplayed, and despite the geopolitical perceptions, there's a lot we could do in common. You mentioned climate change. We can work together on climate change. And the two countries are working together. And also on governance of AI, right? What else can we work together? Academic exchange, more students studying in our respective countries. But I've heard a lot of complaints about Chinese students issue with student visas and even PhD students halfway through their studies are stopped at the airport and sent back. That's very bad, I'm sure that's not your government's policy, So how do we promote more connectivity, as Professor Wong suggested?
Yeah, so at times I think that the United States has crossed some elements. It's a large, diverse country, and there's a lot of agencies involved in a lot of policies. The U.S. has gotten too far forward in viewing a variety of aspects of China's rise as a threat, which are actually not a threat to the United States. I would put most student activities into that category. But conversely, I think that China has also become less welcoming to Americans and American students, as well as business people. So that there is a perceptions situation of threat and counter-threat that leads to escalation and leads to a problem. So you can try to diffuse that through leader-level discussions, which has happened between President Biden and President Xi, that can have an impact for a while. You can try to do the joint project approach, like let's work together on climate change, let's work together on AI, let's work together on global health, and frankly the US and China both failed miserably during COVID to cooperate when it was such an obvious need for the two countries to work together on the pandemic. Or you can just try to manage and muddle your way through while having a relationship that's primarily characterized at the government-to-government level by competition, but have it be in the private sector primarily focused on cooperation. And that, I think, is the goal of many, particularly private sector actors in the United States, to see a situation where, as Professor Huang is defining, you have some separation of the geopolitical frictions from doing business. The challenge comes when there's crossover between business activity, private sector activity, and government perceptions and government needs. Going back to the previous panel's discussion and raising of the issue of dual technology, and one of the panelists said, every technology could be a dual technology. Well, if that's the case, then if you're suspecting the other side of making every item on the planet into a weapon, then there will be no more trade, right? So we do need to figure out the difference between goods which can and should be traded or invested freely and others which need to be protected for national security purposes. That's a really complicated exercise. I think what the Biden team is trying to do is do that while communicating its intentions and direction clearly to the Chinese side. And China is also doing it to some extent. In return, that's being managed okay. I wouldn't say well, but okay at the current point. But it's a potential problem that doesn't have an easy solution to it going forward. The other problem I'd go back to is the underlying concern about the effects of globalization on the U.S. economy, and in particular, those effects when so much manufacturing capacity is being concentrated in China. And so, Regina, going back to your remarks about when Chinese like to save money, culturally, well, that's great, but then they also like to produce everything on the planet and use that savings to create low-cost, high-quality goods inside China in ways that other countries struggle to do, and then you end up with massive trade imbalances and international friction. So these problems need to get worked through, and I think that the most important thing is to understand them clearly, and rather than pointing fingers and doing sort of whataboutism conversations, to actually find fundamental solutions going forward. I've been very disappointed recently in the performance of the G20. It should be a key global forum for working through these problems and coming up with a consensus among major countries going beyond the US and China. We need to get back to doing that much better. The United Nations is kind of a broken mess, and the WTO is also falling apart. A lot of that has to do with the United States, a lot of it has to do with China. So getting back to re-globalization, as the previous panel attempted to address, I think is going to be challenging, but it should be a shared objective with the understanding of what the challenges are, and not just dismissing those challenges as if they didn't exist.
Well, Coach, you already highlighted many problems, how to ring-fence technologies or businesses so that they can be dealt with as businesses per se, not businesses or technologies that have defense implications and could pose threats to national security. Your national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, once said that he wants to keep a small yard with high fence. How is this coming along? From our part of the world, it looks like the yard is getting bigger and bigger. More and more entities being added to the sanctions list, and that will hurt U.S. businesses as well. A lot of your tech companies have big business in China.
It's for me, sorry, Dr. Huang. Just quickly on that, I do think that the fence has a lot of holes in it, and the yard is getting bigger. That's my own impression. And the problem there is that in an atmosphere of distrust and overall sense of contentious competition, then politically the domestic push will be in the direction of making that yard bigger and bigger, beyond what U.S. private sector would like to see. So there's an active dialogue between American companies and the U.S. government about trying to keep that yard from becoming like a golf course. You want it to be more like a little yard. And that is a challenging thing to do given the political pressures on the administration. And the question is whether there's good clarity of purpose. If you're going to have a technology denial policy, is that clearly defined? And you have clear KPIs for success. And I would personally like to see more clear objectives for that, so that it's a minimum, the minimum required technology denial activity takes place. Now I'm in the private sector. People in Congress would say, well, we should have a maximalist approach to that. So it's a difficult issue, but it's something that in a government-to-government sense needs even more communication.
All of us, all three of us are in private sector, and this problem of lack of trust, and what can we do to build more trust, and communication? I'll start with you, Professor Huang.
Thank you again. I also share the observation that the yard is getting larger while the fence is higher. Therefore, in order to reduce risks, to also hopefully even gradually stabilize China-US relations, not only for the two countries, but also for the world. Four, at least, not all, possibilities for keeping the communications, even cooperation, collaborations, are important. Youth, especially students, we say exchanges, local corporations, company, private. Actually, both Huawei and people are private companies, state nor sort of anyhow. So company, and finally to those kind of say NGO or non-governmental agencies for keeping the ties, and hopefully then this can help the official ties, which we used to have more than 65 ministerial level regular communication with the US and China. And then starting from Donald Trump's administration, firstly because of trade, then now expanded to technology, to education, even culture. So we should re-establish, therefore, in order to stabilize the relationship. Of course, in the meantime, U.S. has its own national either security concerns or whatever interests. China the same. But whatever national concerns and security concerns, you need to also have much wider and deeper sort of outlook and see the main possibilities in order to avoid kind of either Cold War or whatever wars against each other.
So, Kurt, do you see U.S.-China relationships stabilizing right now? And what's your recommendations for, helping the relationships to stabilize or even improve, building more connectivity? What do you think of Professor Huang's 4 possibilities?
Well, I think things are more stable now than they were a couple years ago, and a lot of effort's been put into that by the two, the U.S. administration and the Chinese government. But I'm concerned about the impact of U.S. politics on that, which does drive things in the direction of destabilization. I'm concerned about China's impatience with respect to some of the geopolitical issues, and that perhaps creating instability. So in that context, what I would like to see is a more vigorous amount of both communication and then also negotiation. So one of the things about the Biden administration is from the U.S. perspective, they've done a brilliant job of reinforcing American relations with other countries in Asia besides China. But the direct engagement has primarily been information sharing rather than negotiation. And it seems to me that there are areas where a little more direct give and take, trade-offs and agreements being reached, including in areas like climate change, which are usually described as cooperation, but it's actually, a lot of it is a question about who goes first and how much, and at what cost, but also particularly in trade. So there is this discussion in Washington, and I think also in Beijing, about the possible impact of Donald Trump being re-elected as president. He has stated on the campaign trail that he's very interested in the trade deficit and is excited about more tariffs and interested in focusing on the trade deficit as a key priority. So if that is the case, in order to accomplish that, one could see a negotiation approach, as was attempted in the first Trump administration coming back. And if that happens, I hope to see the negotiation be more successful than last time. And I think it's a very challenging negotiation if there is an actual bilateral discussion like that. But I personally would like to see more give and take and actual outcomes-oriented discussion between the two governments rather than just a sharing of information. And even though there's risks, as happened in 2018, of the negotiations breaking down, I still think it's worth the try.
Well, before our time runs out, one final question for our two speakers. What can Hong Kong do? How can we contribute to easing the tensions? In the recent CSIS report published, we note that the U.S. government confirms, in a way, Hong Kong is still important to the U.S. 13,000 companies, 1,300 companies making money in Hong Kong, 85,000 Americans, I think, living quite happily. We have long-standing ties with the U.S. as well, because China is our motherland. China-U.S. are our biggest trade and investment partner, and we know both pretty well. What can we do? What can Hong Kong, despite being a small city, what can we do to help ease tensions and stabilize relationships? Professor Huang.
Thank you. That's exactly, if I may add, apart from that, the four possibilities, the fifth would be the role of Hong Kong. But before this, I can very shortly also respond to the ambassador's suggestions. I think before US and China at the governmental level, even highest level, the crisis management is the first. Second is to jointly identify the common challenges. If there are common challenges, there are common interests. Then how Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is so unique, I would think. On the one side, of course, since 1997, has been also already a part of China. But the other side is also has been and will be a capitalist system and part of the world economy, in particular part of the Western economies. So it has such a, not only unique for China, but unique for the world. We don't have such a place anywhere else. So Hong Kong will bridge not only US China, Western and the rest, the Western but also to help to narrow the problems, even possible confrontations, but rather to provide the platform for all business, small and big, and for also the four opportunities I mentioned can also always be maybe even the first taking place here. So Hong Kong still the place I had such a hope, but actually the CSIS report, I was quite disappointed. They did not really see the good side or opportunities of Hong Kong, but rather identify some so-called problems.
In the context of overall competitive thinking in Washington, I was very happy to see in that context the CSIS report actually holding out the idea that deeper engagement between the U.S. and Hong Kong, including at the official level, would be beneficial to the United States as well as to Hong Kong. Because that thread of engagement between the U.S. and Hong Kong, both official and private, has been lost in the last 5 years. And I, as someone who lived here for a short time and represented the United States, would really love to see that come back. And you spoke, Regina, about stabilization, and I posited that the current environment is one of relative stability compared to a few years ago. That puts the ball in Hong Kong's court, because in that it's not a perfect environment by any means, not even close to being a perfect environment. But in that relatively stable environment, it's a better environment for Hong Kong to make use of the agency that it has, bring its autonomy into full play, organize its messaging, and decide what does it want to do as a super connector. The chief executive last night spoke about Hong Kong as a super connector. Well, great, super connect. So please, I reopen that direct flight to Washington from Hong Kong, right? You probably lose money on a cafe, but please do it anyways. And figure out more opportunities for Hong Kongers to be traveling to the United States and speaking for themselves as Hong Kong. And communicate with America, whether it's New York or Hong Kong or Washington, and reach out and rebuild those bridges that are still there, but make them reinforce and even stronger, because I think that'll be good for the city and it'll be good for U.S.-China relations.
Thank you very much, Kurt, for your advice. The G2G engagement in the past few years has, of course, been damaged by the sanctions, But I shouldn't say we've got used to the sanctions, but I think we work out ways to continue to communicate, And I certainly agree with you. It would be good for Hong Kong and good for U.S. understanding of China and Hong Kong to have more engagement, G2G level, NGO to NGO level, and on other levels too, academic, cultural, and I hope that will happen. So with these remarks, let me conclude our session. And thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Kwong, and thank you, Kurt, for joining us.
Thank you very much for that engaging conversation. Will the panelists please remain on stage, and Professor Yang Tian, please go on stage for a group photo together. Break for 10 minutes, and please enjoy coffee, tea, and serendipity encounters.
Very It's been busy the last
Welcome back, everyone, to GBS 24. As Professor Wang Ping points out in our last panel, this era for zero-sum game is over us. And, we need to collaborate where both parties will benefit. It prevails over confrontation and conflict where both parties will suffer. So, 和而不同，尊重差异. It is only through respect that we can effectively find innovative ways to work together. And one of the ways that we can work together is through science and technology. Because science and technology respects no borders and can unite us all to solve common challenges faced by humanity. And especially in this innovation-driven age, science and technology have been given more power than ever. And with more power comes more responsibility. And in the third panel that we're going to have, we're going to delve into the role of science and technology in dealing with some of the pressing issues facing our humanity. And it's now my honor and pleasure to introduce the moderator for our third panel, Professor Nancy Yip, President of the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and our esteemed panelists, Professor Roger Coimber, Mrs. George Windsor, Professor in Medicine and Professor of Structural Biology at Stanford University School of Medicine, 2006 Nobel Laureate in Chemistry, Dr. Michael Spence, President and Provost of University College London, Professor Wang Xiaodong, Director Investigator, National Institute of Biological Sciences, Beijing, and Professor Andrew Yang Qizhi, Turing Award winner, Dean of the Institute for Interdisciplinary Information Sciences, and Dean of College of Artificial Intelligence, Tsinghua University, Dean of Shanghai Qizhi Institute. And in this panel, they will share their insights on how international collaboration on science and technology can help us to solve some of the pressing issues. Let's welcome them.
Good morning, everyone. First, I would really like to thank Regina for taking the lead in organizing this very exciting summit. Working with Regina over the past few months in preparing for the summit was truly inspiring, so thank you so much. And I'm deeply honored to moderate this panel on science and technology cooperation and the future of mankind. Sharing their perspectives on this very important topic are four distinguished leaders in higher education from the US, UK, and China. So science, technology, and innovation are the common threads among the institutions presented on this panel. So, and all our esteemed panelists are world-renowned scholars in their respective fields. So our aim is to explore ways how to foster a more robust ecosystem for science and technology, and in order to resolve some of the greatest challenges facing the world today. Now, how can we develop and maintain these challenges while upholding the premise of international cooperation with a view to achieving mutual benefits and win-win results? So the first question I would like to pose to our panel is, in light of these immense challenges and tremendous opportunities facing our global communities today, can you share with us key areas where you believe international collaborations are crucial. And what you see as the primary barriers to international collaboration, be it capital, policy, or other factors, and how can these be effectively addressed in order for us to enhance cooperation across different regions? So maybe I invite Roger to address this question. And again, I want to take this opportunity to thank Roger, because it took him 24 hours to come to Hong Kong and just for the summit. And so I am really grateful. Please.
So Nancy, thank you for the opportunity, and I should say that I made this long trip especially out of respect for Nancy, who is a world-leading scholar in her area, whose work in only science I greatly value. There are perhaps just a couple of points that I might make in response to your general introduction. First, for those in government and commerce in the audience, it's important to understand that there is no problem with the free flow of scientific information. It is simply a failure to understand, especially on the part of government around the world, that everything that we find in the course of our research is published, it is all freely available, that has always been true, and it always will be true, and that has to do with the nature of science itself, which can only flourish and succeed in that way. And it goes beyond simply the free flow of information. It is the exchanges between people. Even in the height of the Cold War between the United States and Russia, American and Soviet scientists met regularly to exchange information about their research. When Soviet scientists faced great difficulties at the time of perestroika, it was American scientists who came to the rescue to support their research so that they could continue. None of that has changed. The problem that we face as scientists is the misapprehension on the part of government that somehow there is a need either to protect certain information, which is ultimately self-destructive, or that there is some blame to be attached for people for sharing information. It's a problem we face in the United States today, where people are under threat from the government if they have been seen possibly to be sharing what is, after all, publicly available information with their colleagues from around the world. So the point that lies beyond that, and the second and only further thing I'd like to mention in a brief time in response to your question, it isn't only the flow of information, it is the flow of people. It is the movement of people. It is their personal interaction that matters. And by that, especially young people. Now, I think Nancy, you mentioned in her brief remark that science is international. Well, it's especially true that American science is international. It's often thought that America has led the world in science, but that isn't true. It is people from all around the world working in American laboratories. In a laboratory like mine at Stanford, there have never been more than, say, 20 or 30% of American students and postdoctoral fellows. All the rest come from everywhere in the world, literally everywhere in the world. If governments want to do something to promote the free flow of information and to promote science and for the benefit of their own countries, they will enhance the possibility for young people to train abroad, to train wherever expertise is located, and to form relationships with one another that will last a lifetime and ensure the truest form of international collaboration.
Thank you, Roger. So Roger is a Nobel laureate in chemistry and professor in medicine and professor of structural biology at Stanford University. So maybe Michael, President and Provost of UCL.
So, thanks for your question, Nancy, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I mean, it goes without saying that the big challenges of our age are global challenges, and it is global science that's going to help us to solve them. It also goes without saying that the more people you have in more contexts working on a particular problem and working together, the more rapid the
progress of science is likely to be. And in an environment in which there are significant issues in climate, significant issues around some of the social sciences as well, we need people across the world working together. That all goes without saying. And Roger's already talked about the ways in which strategic competition between countries can create barriers of one kind or another. Barriers that are often artificial because, as he says, information produced particularly in universities is ultimately available for everybody. But it's actually much more boring detail that gets in the way, I think. It's things like differences in regulatory systems in relation to consent for the collection of data. It's things like the availability of funding for collaborative international research when there's much more incentive for national governments to fund national research systems than to contribute to international collaborations. It's differences in regulatory regimes for the conduct of science. It's these kind of things to which both research funding agencies and governments have to pay particular and committed attention if the benefits of international collaboration are really going to be realised. So too, do they need to think about regulatory systems in relation to the free movement of scientists around the world? We know that the European experience was that science, even in the Middle Ages, was international. That even when our universities were first being founded, people were moving between Oxford and Paris, between Paris and Bologna. And how much more important is that now? And so again, in relation to the kind of movement of scientific personnel that Roger was talking about, the immigration and visa systems of different countries need to prioritise the importance of international collaborative science.
Well said. Thank you so much. Chadong is Shaw Laureate in Life Science and Medicine and is the Director and Investigator of National Institute of Biological Sciences of Beijing.
Thank you, Nancy. I also like to echo what the previous two speakers says. I just want to make a very simple fact that the people who try to artificially block scientific collaboration do not know what science is and how science is conducted. For science and technology, it's all about putting everybody's head together, trying to solve the unsolvable problem currently. And the challenge is the problem that challenge the well-being of a human as a species. And in that regard, we do science individually, but science as enterprise is a collective effort of everyone. And if we artificially divide it, the only consequence you're going to get is slow down scientific progress, and you're going to promote tribalism, which is associated with all the other pseudoscience, etc. So from what we are sitting here, looking at all these efforts, trying to divide the scientific collaboration, it's just the people who do not know science, who do not know how science is conducted. In the result, is going to slow down the scientific progress that will benefit everyone. In a reality term, as I have been working in the U.S. for quarter century, now back in China, full-time for 14 years. And China, as traditionally, not as a scientific discovery project. And you gradually start seeing, in recent years, and more original scientific discovery being made. I was anticipating, as more and more these scientific discoveries and the contributions from the traditional non-powerhouse, and you're going to see the force and necessity of these scientific collaboration as a more urgent need, rather than the prejudice. I think another force behind this trying to divide is just the prejudice that from the traditional powerhouses, they don't think everywhere else is relevant.
So a great example of that kind of tension that you're talking about between the lack of understanding in the political classes globally about how science works and the reality of how scientists, even at the height of the Cold War, were getting on and doing it, is of course our experience of the pandemic. So global scientists were working together to address this particular health emergency, and it was only through international collaboration that any sort of, over a very, very long period of time, that any solution was found. Just at the time that politicians were saying, well, my system is going to solve this problem, my scientist is going to do this, and that contrast between the profound tribalism of the political classes and the genuine internationalism of high-quality science was no more evident during the time of the pandemic.
It's important to remember there's a model for international collaboration in science at the level of government that goes beyond what we've discussed. The revolution that we refer to today as biotech is due to a program that began in 1950 in the United States when the National Institutes of Health instituted the first extramural program. It was the first time that governments gave grants for work outside of government laboratories. At the time when my own father, who was a distinguished scientist, was beginning his own career, the budget for research at the university was $50 a year. Government grants, which then became available in the universities, increased that enormously. It spurred the rapid growth of knowledge about human biology, resulting in all the benefit of modern medicine that we have today. It's important to understand that when that extramural program began, it was freely available everywhere in the world. It was not government grants to American laboratories. It was government grants to scientists with the best ideas any place on the planet. That is something which, when Japan then rose to economic prominence and significance in the 1970s, 80s, it tried to emulate by creating its own program based in Strasbourg, also for distribution of research grants coming from the Japanese government around the world. The same thing must be done by all governments with the means to support such research everywhere.
So I guess we need to work together and raise awareness.
Because we're all humans, all subject to the same disease, all in the same boat together, and anything which can be accomplished anywhere for the benefit of human health benefits everybody everywhere.
Totally agree. So maybe Andrew, join the award winner and the Dean of the College of Artificial Intelligence at TU.
Well, thank you, Nancy. It's a great pleasure to be here with the distinguished panelists here today. And I would echo what I just heard my three colleagues, and I agree with them completely. I would just like to make 2 points. Firstly, the idea that we should try to hinder international collaboration is exactly the worst thing to do at this point. And secondly, I believe that this trend of trying to stop international collaboration is an aberration and it will pass in time. And let me elaborate a little bit. Firstly, in my lifetime, I have witnessed it's just an unbelievable amount of scientific and technological advancement. And let me just enumerate that the understanding of nuclear reaction, and secondly, the understanding of human replication and the ability to do gene editing, right? And thirdly, the advancement of artificial intelligence. And actually, just a year ago, that a kind of 70-year-old open problem of solving the Turing's test. It's just overnight overturned. And so these are three things that stand out in my mind. That firstly, great scientific progress. We understand what's going on, why the sun can shine, and we manage to be able to emulate it on Earth in order to produce boundless amount of clean energy. And secondly, the understanding of how the biological process proceed. And then it seems that we have bettered the Creator in that now we can produce things that in nature it would never naturally occur. And thirdly, in artificial intelligence, we now have the ability of sort of simulating human behavior in the department that we are most proud of to be human, namely in terms of the intricate language communication. And so in a sense, the science has progressed to a stage which is in some sense very scary, because we are advancing at such a fast pace, so that even a small group of knowledgeable people might be able to destroy the world. And so the world is a stage where if we use it for the good, we can eliminate poverty, we can create a world which is kind of an Eden for all of us. If we manage properly, with the artificial intelligence, we can create a lot of robots to do dirty work, and so that we can all enjoy life and spending time at a resource like this. and so if we manage to distribute the wealth properly. So the thing we need to do is for the world to come together to see how we can make it happen. And not only for the good, but also to prevent the bad. And to prevent the bad, it means that we have to solve the problem scientifically. And also to be able to implement things globally. So this means that we should, in nuclear, in gene manipulation, in artificial intelligence applications, the world should let the scientists collaborate and work together to figure out a way so that the bad actors will never be able to destroy the world. So that's my first point, that exactly is the wrong thing to do to stop international collaboration. And my second point is that I think this is just an aberration. I think that perhaps many people do not believe it, but I think that the reason that there are some governments that would like to hinder the free flow of information is because they think they are getting the short end of the deal. Because they think that there are only some parts of the world they have the institution and the knowledge base and to be able to do truly creative thinking. They think that the rest of the world is having a free ride, because it is true that sometimes if you are the second to be on the scene, you get the experience free from the earlier ones. And I think that people think that we shouldn't allow that to happen, and we should try to keep the advantage of the breakthrough all to some part of the world. But I think that this will not succeed. In China, I think that I can see in my 20 years in China that institutions that are fairly similar to Western institutions, such as built by Professor Wang, and also the institution I built myself. I think that essentially it is true that you have to build institutions that have a certain type of mode of operation to allow young people to succeed based on their own merits, instead of having a certain hierarchy so that the original people, the people with original ideas don't get the credit. But I think that gradually, examples like our institutions are beginning to appear. And I can see that the young people working in my institute at least, when that I keep track of that, because we have a very flat organization, and I'm keeping track of what they're doing. And the feeling I get is that gradually, and especially in the last 4 or 5 years, that the experience I had having conversation with them is no different from what I had from my 36 years in the United States, working at MIT, Stanford, and so on. And so it's just a matter of time before they're going to do groundbreaking results that are really, really amazing. And I believe that as soon as those kind of things starting to happen, once or twice, I think that the whole world will recognize actually knowledge is not the privilege just of a certain part of the world by accident. It really, the development of technology makes it possible for scientific knowledge and new institutions to appear, not just in China, but I believe it will be soon in many parts of the world. When that happens, people will realize that we are all equal. Human beings are very, very similar, and we should really all work together and live happily. So I'm sorry for my very long speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. So thank you all for your very valuable insight. So maybe now I just ask each of you some specific questions. So, Roger. So again, in light of the recent advancements in environmental research, maybe you can share with the audience some effective strategies that you think will foster international collaborations, especially those that really require cross-border collaborations and maybe data sharing and all that. And what do you think the international team should consider in order to figure out how to overcome some of the collaborative challenges and ensure that the benefits of the scientific discoveries can be universally accessible?
Thank you, Nancy. So I might actually continue on a couple of the points that Andrew just mentioned, because it leads naturally to answers or comments in regard to your question. So Andrew alluded to both the importance of artificial intelligence in science in the world to come, and also commented on the potential of people everywhere to contribute to basic knowledge and the advancement of science. And it comes back in a way to what I said at the beginning. It isn't only about the free flow of ideas, it isn't only about publication. At the end of the day, it always comes back to the people. So Andrew and Weidong, they studied, Shannon studied in, and then worked on the faculties of American universities. And so many others in China and elsewhere around the world have done so. They had those opportunities, but not everyone, not every young person, whether it be China or another Asian nation or in Europe, has that same possibility. And it's important that they should do so. They need to travel to Harvard or MIT, Stanford or MIT or UT Southwestern University to have that opportunity. The governments everywhere should create those opportunities for them. What that means is something which is almost antithetical to the way governments and especially industry work. It means making a long-term investment in both knowledge and especially the people who acquire it It means investing in what we call basic research, which refers to the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, without the solution of a particular problem in mind. It's ironic, or if you will, counterintuitive, that almost all the great problems that face humanity that have ever been solved have been done in that way, not by addressing the problem directly, but rather the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, and then unexpectedly, through what are discoveries, the solutions to great problems emerge. The way governments can make that happen for the benefit of all is to support in their own countries the opportunities for young people to pursue their own curiosity, succeed and to flourish, and then, as Andrew mentioned, they will go on to make great discoveries. They will win great awards. They will achieve great recognition. They will bring honor to their own countries. So I repeat, the most essential response to the question Nancy has posed is to enable young people to pursue their own curiosity in their own countries with all the resources needed to do so.
Thank you, Arjun. So, follow-up question is that universities are increasingly recognized for the third mission, which is, how do we translate the scientific discoveries and make them applicable and bring benefit to society? And there are, of course, challenges in doing that, right? How do we ensure that the innovations are in alignment with the needs of society? So what is your view on this?
So on the one hand, universities should throw up no barriers to the eventual translation of what they discover into what are probably the role of industry in creating new technologies that exploit those discoveries. Universities do create barriers, but that's quite unnecessary. When genetic engineering was developed at Stanford University in the late 1970s, the university had a policy of requiring almost no investment by any company around the world wishing to exploit that opportunity. It made the technology almost freely available. The cost of a license was a few tens of thousands of dollars a year. It resulted in a widespread use of that technology. Today, the situation is very different. Lawyers have taken over. They run the university. And in fact, they make it almost impossible for us to get our own work done, even in the laboratory, not to mention making what we find available to others. I had the recent experience of wanting to collaborate with an important company in the San Francisco Bay Area that was going to make available to us, free of charge, 50 important molecules we needed for our research. Well, the lawyers got in the way, and they said that the university would have to benefit, would have to receive or own the IP for making those molecules, which of course belonged to the company. It was we never got them. So again, there's a place for governments and industry both to eliminate barriers, universities to allow the information to be used very freely, and for governments and industry to support the kind of fundamental research done in the university, which will then transcend those barriers.
Thank you, Arjun. Is it different in China? You want to comment on that?
Well, this is the problem everywhere, and I think in China as well. And you often heard the buzzword for research is organized research. All the big grants is given to the organized research, with particular benefits. 中文叫4个面向国策，就是 targeting specific needs. Again, I have to say, maybe politically correctly, people who propose that don't know how the science is done, and they don't know how the basic science is done. They don't know how the industrial science is done. For the basic science, what we are trying to do is to find out the basic principle that unknown to all of us. That may never be useful, but could be potentially useful down the road. How long? Nobody knows. But you look at the history, many of these things we never thought is useful. Quantum mechanics initially, relativity. When double digits came out, who thought it's going to be useful? But 50 years later, it's become a multi-billion-dollar industry for Valtech. So you never know. But if you, just like Roger said, if you trying to solve a particular problem that is completely unsolvable because the underlying scientific principle is unknown, you're just going to waste your money and waste your effort. Nothing will get achieved. But for the industry, what the industry is doing is always product oriented. So they have to they want to create a product and they want to use science technology to create that product. So in a particular time frame, if you want to do this, then all the scientific principles, the exploratory part of the scientific principle has to be known. Otherwise, they would not be able to get things done in a time frame. So they always get mixed up. And for our academics, we are terrible at doing the organized research. Because our mentality is not great. Our best scientists have a free mind. They wander into the la-la land. And that will never be useful, but also could solve the humanity crisis 50 years down the road.
So the question of balance, isn't it? It's a question of balance both in relation to the two issues in the funding of research, but also two issues in the exploitation of research in relation to intellectual property. So in the funding of research, it's not unreasonable for taxpayers to expect the research of universities in general to be addressed to the sorts of challenges that governments see as facing us. And therefore having a balance between funding for genuinely curiosity-driven research that is going to have benefits decades down the road, and funding that is more directed to particular, more immediate or pressing problems. At a high level, that makes sense, so long as that balance is right and enough funding is left for that fundamental curiosity-driven research. The same thing is true in relation to intellectual property. And being an intellectual property lawyer who runs a university, I won't take your comments too personally, but there is there was a moment in the history of university policy that was particularly unfortunate. It was a moment in American legislative history, and it was that moment when the Bayh-Dole Act came into force. And basically the notion was universities produce all of these great ideas have commercial value, and therefore the taxpayer should get some sort of benefit from the ideas that are produced. And universities should really try and capture the value of the intellectual property they produce. But of course we all know the outcome of that. It was a total legislative nightmare. A tiny percent of American universities, tiny percent, actually pay for the cost of their tax transfer office through the value of the commercialization of their intellectual property. So as an income stream, the intellectual property of universities is not merely the goose that laid the golden eggs that the authors of the Bayh-Dole Act thought it should be. On the other hand, it is really important that universities are savvy about intellectual property because it's crucial to the dissemination of their research. Some findings are only useful to companies if there is the sort of exclusivity that allows them to exploit and to make the sorts of investments that will lead to the translation of that research. So the question is again one of balance. And what's the mindset of those university administrators? If the mindset of the university is that intellectual property is a tool for the dissemination of research, just the same way as publication of conference presentations or whatever it might be is a tool for the dissemination of research, and internal intellectual property policies are directed towards that, towards facilitating the kinds of transactions that might enable the exploitation of research, to making it easier to get those molecules, to having tools for making it easy for young researchers on non-onerous terms to disseminate their findings relatively freely, then intellectual property can actually help in the dissemination of the work of the university. It's only when the mindset becomes the same one that we were talking about before, the nation states sometimes have much more appropriate, much more, I think the word you used was tribal, that we get a problem. And so it's that balance between funding that is curiosity driven and funding that is directed to a particular purpose. Taking intellectual property and engagement with the private sector seriously, but also not being excessively greedy in relation to intellectual property. It's balance in all of these things that are happening in international collaboration.
So if I could just make a couple of brief remarks. First of all, in respect to what Weidong mentioned, it's important to know that all of science is eventually applied. It's only a matter of time, sometimes a long time. Where someone once said, there are only two kinds of science, applied science and not yet applied science. And that is very true, and we all know it to be the case. So one shouldn't worry whether the science will be applied, or whether the discoveries that are made will eventually be applied, because they are all useful. No knowledge is wasted. What we lack is sufficient knowledge. In response to what Michael just said, it's interesting to remember the example of the AT&T Bell Labs, one of the greatest institutions in the history of the world for development of technology. At those labs, just about everything that we know of today that relates to technology was invented. They discovered everything. Everything from what is the basis of cell phone communication to satellite communication to computers to on. There's nothing that wasn't invented at Bell Labs, and they patented nothing. They made it all freely available to the world. AT&T did not harvest a single profit from any of those findings. Was that a bad thing?
It wasn't, but it also wasn't sustainable. That's why they don't exist anymore.
I mean, I think, but the important thing is that they don't exist anymore, and it's a good thing.
So it's not sustainable.
So I think that the point here is not you have to have a particular kind of funding model in order to make innovation genuinely available, and it has to be not dependent upon heavy investment from the private sector for the application. But once you have to have heavy investment for private sector for application and share the risk of translation with the private sector in ways that was less commonly the case in the days of the AT&T Bell Labs, then you need to be able to give some period of exclusivity. But the question is what the public funder is trying to do, and whether or not the public funder is trying to speed up the process of the not yet, or whether or not the public funder is putting an impediment in the way of ever happening. And I think that's the really tricky balance to get right, both in public policy terms, but also for individual universities. You know, when I was at the University of Sydney, we had a truly out there experimental laboratory with a major global company. And there was a whole lot of debate at the beginning about how we were going to do intellectual property. And in the end, what we said is, this tiny number of things will belong to the university. This tiny number of obvious things will belong to the company. This huge area of activity, if it creates anything, there'll be so much money we won't have to worry about it. And so let's just think about all of that later. And I think it's that generosity of spirit that you're talking about that was so much a part of the AT&T Bell Labs, that we need on the part of government funders and on the part of the university administration to see them not yet become much shorter.
So Michael, related to that, so in what ways can academic institutions and the private sector collaborate more effectively to foster innovations? For example, Luciano, how do you do it?
So there's been a lot of work done in different jurisdictions in the risk tolerance of investors. And I think there is an issue in some places, particularly in Europe, in relation to the amount of risk that investors are willing to take in innovation. That's a cultural challenge on the business side. On the university side, I think we have to be savvy in understanding the needs of our commercial partners, and we have to really reduce the transaction costs of licensing. So the sorts of things that Roger was talking about, where lawyers become involved and the negotiation takes months and months. There's nothing that kills a business university cooperation better than that. We need more standard term licenses that are generous in their approach to the exploitation of university intellectual property, and the universities returning to a sense of their public mission.
Thank you, Michael. So shall I go back to you again? So, I mean, a lot of the scientific advancements actually have prompted some controversies, right? Like gene editing, for example. So, how can we ensure that the scientific breakthroughs can be leveraged for the good of humanities?
I think this is there are two elements to it. I think one is clearly the system design. We just mentioned, you set up the tech transfer office. You have a collaboration. You try to eliminate system barriers for the transfer of technology to the industry. You try to educate the investment community that, in Chinese words, try to draw the pie in the sky that eventually they're going to get multiple returns. But also it has a culture element, I think, is equally important. Roger mentioned Silicon Valley. I think I heard the joke that one of my colleagues, in your university, student come to him and says, "Oh, we got experiments, exciting results. Can we patent it?" And the professor said, "We should repeat it first." So it's the cultural elements. Everyone tries to be an entrepreneur. I think that is also is important. I think what's interesting is I realized back to Beijing. I think that the Chinese are natural born entrepreneurs, and even in Beijing. I think once the culture is there, and there are lots of this, the people start to look for, the value, the potential value of their scientific discovery, and if the system is set that way that they can relatively easy to take it out, to lead to the industry to get funded by the private investors, and then it's become an ecosystem. I think it's also going to feed feedback to the scientific community, both in terms of talent education. As we also mentioned, one of the barriers, always we argue that the universities, the research institutions, their primary goal is still trying to train the students, train them in a way as a scholar, not as a technician, in a company. So, in that way, you try to, which is conflict from if your lab is trying to work on a particular problem, posed by the company, you may not be able to train your student properly, and it's not for his or her best interest. So I think this is the biggest, the barrier. But on the flip side, if you have industry flourishing in your neighborhood, all the students that is trained is going to have a at least in that regard, has a future if they choose to go to the industry. So, I think there is no, right answer, but for the leadership, scientific leadership and the community leadership, and if they want high-tech industry to happen in their neighborhood, they should have worked for both the system-wise to make easy to set up companies, for the university professor to tech transfer, but also the culture-wise, to make, because our academic, we have this guilt deep down, like our salary is come from taxpayers. We are responsible to train our students to inherit, right? To inherit, our scientific heritage. And we are too much leaning towards our not job description, which is vague to begin with, not called for. We have this guilty conscience, whether we should do it, whether we did it right or not. And I think with the right culture, I think the Stanford professor may have feel much less guilty, going to work to the other side, maybe than other universities.
What Stanford has that not many other places have in the world is not actually a large percentage of income from commercialization or from private firms. Most global research universities have similar kinds of amounts of funding coming in from industry as Stanford or MIT or whatever. What Stanford has that is a genuine global advantage is a free movement of talent between the local innovation ecosystem and the university. And for many universities operating in other parts of the world, it's precisely that free movement of talent. And that was so much a part of the AT&T Bell story too, wasn't it? That people came from the university into government labs, into private labs, moved back into the university. But we've all become so much more guild card owning in our career structures that sort of thing has become more difficult in many parts of the world.
Definitely, I think collaborations among universities, policymakers, and funding agencies, I think, is fundamental. Yes, Andrew.
Well, let me just add a point about for faculty members to start their own businesses. Sometimes, especially in the area of artificial intelligence, that in order to push their work forward, it's not possible just to depend on the standard government grant or even industry grant. You have to build a startup company so that you'll be able to test out your ideas, because you really need a lot of engineering in order to execute your ideas. And so I have, just in the last 2 years, we have a very young faculty who work in a very hot topic. I think that most of you probably have heard about that Elon Musk a couple of years ago, maybe just last year, showed his humanoid robots, because that's supposed to be, the humanoid robot is supposed to be the jewel on the crown for robotics, and nowadays, eventually, it will be the crowning achievement for the merging of AI and robotics, and that's going to change the whole world. We're going to be full of robots and very intelligently conversing with them. So this young faculty has great talent, and he is a person who knows hardware, software, algorithm, everything. And so he had to start to do a startup company. And we have another more senior faculty who work in quantum computing, essentially building quantum computers. And in order to be able to actually go somewhere, he had to to start a company to build quantum computers. And so this has made me realize that actually today's world for the academics is very complex for both the faculty and for the administrator and for senior faculty. Namely that it's very difficult to find a balance that how do you like your faculty to do their work, because that if you go either the industrial or the academic side, you're going to miss some chance. So this is something that I think that Tsinghua University has been struggling with, and I think that they have finally seemed to settle on some balancing point, but it's still not very satisfactory. I'm wondering whether anybody has found the perfect balance point in doing that.
It's tough to find a balance. So the panelists actually agreed to open up to Q&A from the audience, and they are very keen to respond to any questions from the audience. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm David Bowman. I have questions. Today we talk about the need for cooperation globally for science and for human mankind. This is great and ideal, but the way I see reading the news, the world seems to be more divided every single day with a lot of elections in many different countries, and in November we have the US elections, and the world is a lot more divided in terms of beliefs in political systems, in digital divide, AI divide, and a lot. And it comes to, I recall Roger mentioned that during Cold War, there was collaboration between US and Russia. But I think time has changed. Is this going to be more difficult? Or do we need a big crisis until we reunite? That we go to the, for the benefit of mankind, we need to deal with a serious problem big enough that we put down our differences in ideology and whatnot. And I think politically and in terms of geopolitics, there's really no higher governing body governing the country's behavior, because of hegemony or because of the lack of trust that in a multipolar world, resources will be taken up by bigger countries in terms of scientific talents and natural resources and the like. So, going forward, I'd like to hear what your thinking is going forward, or perhaps scientists should form lobbying groups in different countries to lobby the respective countries to go the way it should be, or great scientists run for offices such that they can change the way how a country sees scientific development. Thank you.
So, David, let me respond to your comments very briefly. Taking the last remark you made first, it would be wonderful if there were more scientists in government. There are only two that I can think of immediately. There was Angela Merkel, who was, of course, a chemist, and then there is a single PhD scientist in the entire American Congress of several hundred people. Clearly something is wrong there if these are the people who are supposed to legislate with regard to all of the concerns that have been discussed here today. Beyond that, however, you commented about the remark I made at the beginning, and as another example, there is no geopolitical problem more acute than one that I'm familiar with, the war in the Middle East, where Iran is bent on the destruction of Israel. But it may surprise you to know that Israeli and Iranian physicists meet every year on an island in the Mediterranean to discuss string theory. So scientists will find a way, because scientists are only interested in truth, and they don't care where it's found, where it comes from. It doesn't have a nationality, it doesn't have a name on it. Scientists will find a way. It is true, however, as you say, governments will try and make it more difficult. And that has happened already today in regard to the geopolitical problem between the United States and China. It will never prevent American and Chinese scientists from communicating, from sharing thoughts and ideas, and from a friendly, collegial collaboration. But governments will make it more difficult. They have done in the past, they do so now, they will do so in the future. As you say, if we had more scientists in government, perhaps it would be different.
The geopolitical fragmentation is only a large-scale example of a much more significant issue that I think universities across the world have failed adequately to address, and that is a fragmentation of discourse, and a fragmentation of discourse into things that you can put on a TikTok post or on a Twitter feed. And we've been addressing that at UCL through working much more consciously with our staff and students around what we call the epistemic virtue. What does it mean to disagree well, to disagree passionately and in ways that express genuine conviction, but nevertheless are open to listening to other people, are looking for argument for the points at which there is genuine disagreement rather than apparent disagreement, choosing language commensurate with increasing understanding, all those sets of traditional virtues around dialogue that much in the current technological context have eroded, and that quite frankly universities focus in the last 50 years on technical education and away from much more general moral and personal development in young people have left eroded. And what we have found, rather encouragingly, is an enormous public appetite for engaging in this conversation. So we've been doing specific training with staff and with students. What does it mean to recruit for genuine pluralism in your department? How do you avoid the nauseating process of narcissistic self-reproduction, which is most academic hiring? How do you, what's the role of the teacher in the classroom? Should the student ever know what she believes, or should the student be empowered to make up her own mind? But we've also been engaging with the public, and when we first did this, we put a tiny little notice on our website about an event to have a conversation about some of these things. 700 people turned up. So I think there is a desire in the public to begin building bridges, to begin the conversation again. And the sort of scientific collaboration that Roger has talked about so powerfully, I think offers hope that might happen.
Thank you. I'm very ready to conclude this panel. So I want to thank my distinguished panelists for their invaluable insights, and I do hope that the ideas that we raised today will continue to resonate and will continue to inspire dialogues, collaborations, and actions. So thank you all again for attending this session. Please show me to give a round of applause for them.
Thank you very much. Will all panelists please remain on stage, and Mrs. Regina Yip and Professor Yang Jianmian, please come on stage for a group photo. Science and technologies have always been the driving force that propels human society forward, and we hope to continue the global collaboration to continue to make progress for mankind. Thank you very much. Now we'll take a short break. Please take all your personal belongings with you as the hotel staff will reset the table for lunch. So we'll come back here by around 12:15. Thank you.